Hey everyone, this is Kevin from the chesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be going over the Traxler counterattack, which is one of my favorite defenses from black. It is one of the most aggressive openings that you can play as black. You often won't get an opportunity to play it, but if you do have an opponent that really enjoys the Italian game, which is pretty much what it comes from, then you will have more opportunities than not to try this out. So it starts out again with the Italian game, pawn e4, pawn e5, knight f3, simple development move from white, trying to control the center. Black responds, knight c6, trying to do the same. And then the bishop comes to c4. This is the Italian game, and black's going to play the two-knight defense. So this is kind of where it all stems from right here. But now white's going to play knight to g5. Again, attacking this square on f7, and black really has to decide what he wants to do. Now, a lot of times from here you will see black go into the fried liver attack as far as the defense side from black, which basically looks like pawn to d5, trying to break up this 2 attack on the f7 square. But the Traxler counterattack pretty much just says, I don't even care that my f7 square, which is the weakest square for black at the beginning of the game, is being attacked. Instead, I'm going to bring my bishop to c5, and I'm going to attack the other square, this pawn on f2. This is the weakest square from white. So if you're going to attack my f7 square, I'm going to attack your f2 square. And right away we can see both sides have very, very deadly attacks going on against the king. In this video exclusively, we're going to be talking about what happens when the knight takes on f7, which is what I see most of the time. This knight here cannot be taken from this king on e8, and at the same time he's attacking the queen on d8 and the rook here on h8. So as far as a material standpoint, this is a very good move from white. But black has other ideas, and his idea is to come down and attack the king here on e1. He's going to sacrifice this bishop on f2 to try to lure out the king and just try to have a deadly attack on this king here. So white does have a lot of different options. Some of the options obviously would be to f1. Obviously he can come to e2, and he can take on f2. So we're going to kind of be going over those 3 different options that white has and kind of go over some of the main concepts that you'll see from black while you want to attack the king over and over. Because again, this is very aggressive from black, and you're not giving up this bishop on f2, and you're not letting your queen on d8 and your rook here on h8 just sit there being attacked by this knight for no reason. You're going to attack, and you're going to attack the entire game. So the first thing we're going to look at is if the king takes on f2, which seems like a logical move. Obviously he wants to get as much material as he can. He knows that he's going to have to move his king somewhere. He's being under attack right here from the bishop on f2, so he knows he can no longer castle, and his king's not going to be safe. So he might as well take as much material as he can. Now from here, as you can see, the best move from black here is going to bring his knight to e4, attacking the king here, and at the same time freeing up this queen on d8 to get out of the way. Obviously he doesn't want to lose his queen on d8 if he doesn't have to with the knight here on f7. So what is he going to do? He's going to make away. At the same time, he's gaining a tempo by attacking the king here on f2. Now white from here does have a lot of different options. Obviously he can come back to f1 if he wants to. He can come back to g1. The best move really is going to be g1, although it kind of looks really passive from white. His rook is obviously blocked in. He's not going to be able to use this rook anytime soon. From here, black has 2 options. He can really bring his queen to h4, or he can also bring his queen to e7. Obviously, one, he wants to get his queen involved into the game. At the same time, he does not want to lose this queen from this knight here on f7. So the more aggressive move, as you can tell, is queen to h4, really starting an attack on the king side from white here. It's going to be really hard for white to defend the entire game. Now keep in mind, from both sides, if you do play correctly, there are some great defenses and some great attacks from the white and the black side. So I'm not going to go over every single line because there are thousands of them, but I do want to kind of go over some of the big ideas. So that's g1. Again, this is probably the best move, but it does look pretty passive. So if white really hasn't played this a lot, it's really hard to kind of find this. A lot of times from here you will just see white retreat back to f1. From here again, black can come to h4. Again, not only is this getting involved into the game, his rook here on h8 is safe because again, black has a 1-move checkmate here on f2 if white does not defend very well. At the same time, keep in mind that this knight here is very, very potent. At the same time, black, anytime he wants to, can bring another knight here on d4, which is going to attack very well. From here, white may bring his queen to f3. Again, he has to try to defend against this square here on f2. From here, black can just go ahead and start to attack more. As we talked about, he is now bringing his knight to d4. He has a lot of different attacks going on. Anytime he wants to, he can castle on the king side and really have his rook eye down on this f-file. And this is going to be really hard for white to really cope with. Again, he doesn't have his a rook, he doesn't have his knight or his dark square bishop into the game, and his white knight over here on h1 is very passive. So a lot of different variations you can see for black. Very, very strong attack that black has. We can go and continue and just show you some of the variations that you will see from here. The pawn might come to g3. The queen could now come down to h3 attacking, checking the king. If the queen tries to come to g2, obviously white would really just like to trade off material. Anytime you're being pressured, if you can pretty much exchange pieces, that'll kind of alleviate some of the pressure that your opponent has. But now the queen can come back to f5, a much better square for the queen here. Really puts a lot of pressure on white if the king now moves back to e1, because again the queen can't move here because now this square on f2 is now being attacked twice by this knight here and this queen here from f5. So now the knight can come to c2 and forking both the rook here on a1 and attacking the king here on e1. So a lot of different attacks as we talked about that black has, and it's going to be really hard for white to defend against all these attacks. A worse move that you may see from white, if they just get really flustered, obviously we are attacking them with tempo, is they could bring their king back to e1. This is a problem because the queen's going to come to h4 regardless. But after the queen comes to h4, we're also gaining another tempo. We're attacking the king here. If he tries to now block us on g3, then our knight can come in and take on g3. Now if he recaptures with his pawn from h2 to g3, then the queen can now come to h1. As you can see, pretty much white's entire queen side is undeveloped. It's going to be really hard for him to bring out his pieces. At the same time, although black is down in material, he really has a really strong attack here. Obviously this king is just pretty much going to be running around the board the entire game, and this queen is very, very strong. From here the bishop may come to f1. Again, if the king came to e2, this would be a huge mistake. The knight could come to f4, getting more and more pieces involved into the game, and the queen's going to be lost here. So obviously the best move from here would be the bishop comes down to f1. From here, black can castle on the king side. Again, he doesn't want to lose this rook, and he still wants to be able to castle, and this rook here on f8 is going to be very, very strong, obviously eyeing down on this f1 square. If we have a rook and a queen both eyeing down on this f1 square, again, any more attack that black has on white, it's just going to be that much harder for white to defend. So from here you may see the queen come to e2. Again, he has to do something to try to defend against this f1 square, because his king's not going anywhere and this bishop sure is not going anywhere, and trying to pretty much developing these pieces right now is going to be way too late. So from here the knight can come to d4, again just adding more and more pressure onto this side. Now the queen comes to g2, trying to exchange off pieces. Now from here black can go ahead and exchange off pieces if he wants to. He can go ahead and take on g2, and after he takes on here, then the knight can come in and capture on c2 and forking this king here. So if the king moves, then we can come in on a2, and as you can already see, black is fine in material. Obviously at the same time he has both of his rooks here, and he has a very, very good game. The king has just been run all over the game. Black does have more pawns here, so this is going to be an easy win for black, and this all stems from the very, very potent attack that black had from the beginning. Now keep in mind, he could take on f2, but he does not have to. A lot of times you may run into a tricky player that says, you know what, you're kind of gambiting up this bishop here on f2, and I know you're going to gain a tempo when you capture here on e4 with your knight. So instead I'm either going to bring my king to f1, or I'm going to bring my king to e2. In this case we'll talk about f1. Now black does have a lot of options right here, but typically his first move is going to be queen to e7. As you can tell right away, black cannot gain a tempo with an attack on the king, so right away he doesn't want to lose his queen. Obviously his queen is sitting here being attacked by the knight, and since there's not going to be any forced win right away, first thing he needs to do is get his queen to safety. Now from here, white is somewhat safe. Obviously, there are a lot of attacks that black has, but for the most part, white really wants to just start taking material as much as he can. So from here, black's going to play pawn to d5. Keep in mind this is pretty much a standard what you're going to see with the queen coming to e7 and then your pawn coming to d5. Now white does have two options here. The most logical is going to be pawn to d5. You always want to capture with your pawns and being supported by your minor pieces in the beginning of the game. So from here, after the pawn takes on d5, then the knight's going to come to d4, really getting involved into the game. Obviously he's being attacked from this pawn on d5, so he wants to not only avoid being captured, but he wants to get involved into the game. As you can see right here, not only is this knight very active, but he's also threatening taking on c2, which is going to take this rook here on a1. So from here, it's most logical for the pawn to come to c3, and this does two things. One, it really attacks this knight here on d4, as we can see, but it also gives way for the queen to move out of the way. Anytime this bishop, this light square bishop for black wants to come into the game, obviously this is going to be a lost cause for white's queen once we have the knight here on d4. So he really wants to not only attack this, but he wants to give way for his queen to get out of the way. Now the bishop can come to g4, obviously getting another minor piece involved into the game, at the same time gaining a tempo by attacking the queen here. Now the queen obviously needs to move, so more than likely the queen will come to a4, trying to gain a tempo by attacking the king here on e8. Black really has two moves. He can bring his bishop back to he can bring his bishop back to d7, or as we just saw, he can bring his knight to d7. Now I find that it's a lot more aggressive for black to bring his knight to d7. Obviously, we just brought our bishop out, so there's really no reason in my head to bring the bishop back to d7. And again, the bishop in this open space here really puts a lot more pressure on white here. So you can always defend with knight to d7, and then white can, from here, take our bishop here on f2. Again, really just trying to bite away at all the material that he can, since he is in a lot of pressure. Anytime you have a lot of pressure on you, you want to gobble up as many pieces as you can to try to alleviate some of that pressure. From here, the queen's going to come to h4. As you can start to see, black has a really strong attack here going. And it's really hard for white this entire game to try to figure out the best way to defend this. Now from here, the king wants to come to e3. As you can start to see, it's really starting to evolve into the white king running around the board. We can go as far as you want to kind of go over all the variations. The queen can come to g5, really starting to attack the king. There's not a lot of great places for the king to come. The queen can come to f5, again continuing to attack. After the king now comes to g1, very passive square. This rook no longer is going to be coming into the game. Then black can castle on the queen side. Again, this knight here is going to fall on h8. If white tries to gobble up more material, let's say pawn takes on d4, taking the knight here, we'll just kind of go in through. The rook can come here to f8, again putting a lot of pressure. Obviously queen to f1 is going to be checkmate. White really has to defend against that. So one of the moves he can do is pawn to h3, again kind of giving way for a square for his king to go. From here, the queen can come to f2, attacking the king. If the king starts to run, we can sacrifice our bishop. After the king comes, then the pawn can come to g5, and it's going to be a good game for white here. It's going to be all over. So, as I've talked about many times in chess, it's not always about how many pieces you have, it's about how many active pieces you have into the game attacking your opponent. So as we can see, even though black is down a crap ton of material, it's going to be very hard for white to win this game. His dark square bishop's not doing anything. Both of his rooks are passive. His knight here is still on b1, and his queen's over here. He was trying to gobble up some material. At the same time, he's nowhere in the action, and he can't really attack our king, because pretty much every move that black has is attacking the king. So just one of the ideas that you may see. Now, the last idea that you may come across in the Traxler, and we'll go ahead and go over a famous game by Traxler, and this is kind of what started the entire Traxler counterattack, is we'll go ahead and start into it with knight takes on f7 and bishop takes on f2. Now in Traxler's famous game, his opponent played king to e2. We've already talked about what happens if the king takes on f2. We've also talked about what happens if the king moves to f1. And now we're going to see king to e2, which, as we can see from this famous game, is probably the worst move ever. And Traxler just pretty much dominated him from the get-go, basically teaching him a lesson on pretty much you need to know all these crazy openings or I'm just going to dominate you on the board. So that's what he did. So he played knight to d4, again getting his minor pieces involved into the game. If you have a ton of minor pieces in the middle of the board and the king is just being chased all over, it's really hard for your opponent to do anything. At the same time, it really allows you just to be creative in chess. The more pieces you have active, if you're chasing around the king, it pretty much just comes down to a big puzzle for you. Can you navigate all your pieces around to checkmate your opponent? And that's pretty much what Traxler did in this game. So from here the king came to d3, and now the pawn came to b5. Now this is a pretty intense move right here. White pretty much saw that if the knight came on d8, because right away he's not being attacked here, so in some regard he could try to just gobble up material. He saw that after he takes on d8, that the pawn could come here, take on c4 with the tempo, attacking the king here on d3, and after he takes, the bishop could come to c6, and after the king moves, then the bishop could come down to e2. The queen's going to be lost. At the same time, black's going to have a much better position. He's going to be able to take this knight here on d8. At the same time, the white king's in the middle of the board. Black can pretty much still attack the entire time, and he has a much better position than white does. So in this case, in the game as we saw it, instead of taking on d8 the queen, white decided to instead move his bishop back to b3. Now from here, black brought his knight down to e4, again just getting ready for the attack. And so from here white decided now would be a good time to take the queen on d8. Obviously he didn't realize just how big of an attack that black had. So from here the knight's going to come to c5, attacking the king on d3. The king now moves to c3, and then pretty much it was just game over. It was just a matter of Traxler pretty much using all his pieces to dominate. So from here the knight's going to come to e2, and this does a few things. One, not only does it check the king, forcing white to do a move, but at the same time it frees up the bishop to come to d4, which is just a fascinating move in itself. So the queen's going to capture, and the bishop is now going to come to d4, attacking the king here. So the king's going to come to b4, and the pawn's going to come to a5, attacking. Pretty much the rest of the game is just going to be attacking all over the board. So the king's going to take on b5. Anytime your king goes past your opponent's, or past your own fourth rank, it's usually not a good thing. It usually means your opponent's just attacking all over the board. So from here the bishop came to a6, and after the king took, then the bishop came to d3. Now I know myself, I would be just so tempted to go ahead and take this queen on e3, or excuse me, on e2, but Traxler realized he pretty much had a mating net all the way, so he knew that when he brought his bishop to d3, not only was this a discovered attack, but he also wanted to keep this bishop where it was, and he really wanted to keep this queen out of the way. So it's just kind of a just an extra little dagger saying, I don't even need to take your queen, I'm going to win regardless. So the king came to b4, and now the knight's going to come to a6. Again, every move from now is going to be an attack. The king's going to now come to a3, and again another discovered attack. He's now sacrificing a knight here on b4, and after he takes on b4, then pawn to c5 is checkmate. Now, I don't know how far along he thought this through, but this is one of the most fascinating attacks that I've seen in a long time. Just sacrifices, really getting all his pieces exactly where they need to be so that he can win the game with checkmate. So, hope you guys enjoyed. Really what I want to stress with the Traxler counterattack is there's so many variations, but it really allows you, as far as black, to really be creative with your attack. So there's many different ways that white can try to defend. He can try to gobble up more of your pieces. He can try to win that game. Or he can just try to go into safety mode and just try to defend his king the entire game. But you pretty much as black have so many different options to attack that I really like this defense from black. So anytime you see your opponent at the beginning of the game, if you're starting up with the Italian game, and then you see him try to bring his knight to g5, you can just kind of wave your finger at the computer board and say, no sir, I don't even care about this f7 square, I'm bringing my bishop down to c5. And then just see what he does. He might just resign right there, which would be kind of funny. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and check out the website, www.thechesswebsite.com, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.